At 14:15 on January 26, 1945, Second Lieutenant Audie Murphy climbed onto a burning M10 tank destroyer in the frozen fields outside Holtzwihr, France. The vehicle was taking direct hits from German artillery. Flames licked from the engine compartment. The fuel tanks could explode at any moment. Murphy stood fully exposed on the turret, gripping the .50 caliber machine gun with both hands, and began firing into a German infantry assault 50 yards away. He was 20 years old, 5 feet 5 inches tall, 112 pounds. 6 German tanks and 250 infantry were advancing across open ground toward his position. His company had been reduced from 128 men to 18 in 4 days of fighting. The survivors were retreating into the woods behind him. Murphy had ordered them back. He stayed forward alone. For the next hour, he would hold an entire Wehrmacht company at bay while standing on a vehicle that could incinerate him at any second. The temperature was 14 degrees Fahrenheit. Snow covered the ground, and Audie Murphy had already decided he was not going to retreat. If you want to see how a Texas sharecropper's son became the most decorated American soldier of World War II, hit that like button. It helps us bring more forgotten stories to light. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Murphy. Audie Leon Murphy was born on June 20th, 1925, in Kingston, Texas, the 7th of 12 children. His father was a sharecropper who struggled to feed his family during the Depression. Murphy picked cotton for $1 a day. He hunted rabbits and squirrels to put meat on the table. By age 12, he was the primary provider for his siblings after his father abandoned the family. His mother died 2 years later. Murphy was 16, responsible for 9 younger brothers and sisters, working whatever jobs he could find in Hunt County. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, Murphy tried to enlist. The Marines rejected him. Too small. The paratroopers rejected him. Too short. The Army finally accepted him in June 1942, a month before his 18th birthday. He weighed 112 pounds. The recruiting officer waived the minimum weight requirement. Murphy wanted to fight. The Army needed bodies. The transaction was straightforward. Basic training at Camp Wolters, Texas. Advanced infantry training at Fort Meade, Maryland. Murphy qualified as a marksman with every weapon the Army issued: rifle, carbine, machine gun, mortar. His hands were steady. His eyes were exceptional. Growing up hunting game had taught him patience, accuracy, and the ability to remain motionless for extended periods. Skills that would prove useful in combat. The 3rd Infantry Division shipped overseas in early 1943. Murphy arrived in North Africa as a private in Company B, 1st Battalion, 15th Infantry Regiment. He saw his first combat during the invasion of Sicily in July. A German machine gun position was holding up his platoon's advance near Palermo. Murphy crawled to within 30 yards, killed the crew with rifle fire, then turned the German weapon on retreating enemy soldiers. His platoon sergeant noticed. So did his company commander. The pattern repeated itself in Italy. At Anzio, Murphy single-handedly destroyed a German tank with grenades. At the Volturno River, he led a night patrol that killed 15 enemy soldiers and captured 4. By the time the 3rd Division landed in southern France for Operation Dragoon in August 1944, Murphy was a staff sergeant with a battlefield commission to 2nd lieutenant pending. He was 19 years old. He had killed more enemy soldiers than anyone could accurately count. The Colmar Pocket was a German-held salient west of the Rhine River in eastern France. Wehrmacht forces had retreated into this defensive position after the Allied breakout from Normandy, creating a bulge 30 miles deep and 50 miles wide that threatened the Allied advance into Germany. The terrain favored defense. Flat agricultural land crisscrossed with irrigation ditches and tree lines. Small villages built of stone that could be converted into fortified strongpoints. The Vosges Mountains to the west limited Allied maneuver options. The 3rd Infantry Division received orders to attack the southern edge of the pocket in January 1945. The objective was to collapse the German position from multiple directions, forcing a withdrawal across the Rhine. Murphy's company was assigned to take the village of Holtzwihr, a cluster of farm buildings and houses that controlled a key road junction. The company jumped off at 6 o'clock on January 14th. 128 men advancing in a skirmish line across frozen fields. German resistance was immediate and accurate. Machine gun positions fired from prepared defensive works. Mortar rounds fell on the advancing Americans with practiced precision. The Wehrmacht troops defending Holtzwihr were veterans from the Eastern Front, survivors of the Russian campaigns who understood defensive warfare better than most Allied soldiers understood offensive tactics. Company B took casualties throughout the first day. By nightfall, they had advanced 400 yards. The cost was 14 men wounded, 3 killed. Murphy's platoon held the right flank of the company position. He spent the night checking his men, redistributing ammunition, ensuring that fighting positions were properly dug despite the frozen ground. The attacks continued for 12 days. House-to-house fighting through Holtzwihr, sniper duels across open fields, artillery exchanges that reduced buildings to rubble. The Germans fought for every structure, every hedgerow, every irrigation ditch. American casualties mounted steadily. Reinforcements arrived from the rear, fresh-faced replacements who lasted hours or days before becoming casualties themselves. By January 25th, Company B had been reduced to 19 men. Murphy was the only officer still standing. The company commander had been evacuated with shrapnel wounds. The executive officer was dead. The platoon leaders were gone. Murphy was in command by default, a second lieutenant leading the survivors of what had once been a full-strength rifle company. The morning began quietly, too quietly. Murphy moved through his perimeter at first light, checking positions. His men were exhausted. For days of continuous combat, with minimal sleep, rations were cold care rations eaten in foxholes. Water froze in canteens. The temperature had dropped overnight to 10 degrees Fahrenheit. Men stamped their feet to maintain circulation, knowing that frostbite could disable as effectively as bullets. The company held a position along the southern edge of Holtzwihr. To their front lay 200 yards of open agricultural land, then a tree line that marked the limit of American advance. Beyond that tree line, German forces were regrouping. Murphy had sent patrols forward during the night. They reported tank sounds, the distinctive rumble of tracked vehicles moving into position. The Wehrmacht was preparing something. At 8 o'clock, 2 M10 tank destroyers arrived from battalion headquarters. The vehicles were track platforms mounting a 3-inch anti-tank gun in an open-top turret. Each carried a crew of 5 and a .50 caliber machine gun for close defense. The tank destroyer commander, a lieutenant whose name Murphy never learned, positioned both vehicles along the road on Murphy's left flank. The placement gave them clear fields of fire across the open ground to the tree line. Murphy briefed the tank destroyer crews on the tactical situation. German armor was forming up in the woods. An attack was probable, possibly within hours. The M10s should remain in their current positions, prepared to engage enemy tanks at maximum range. The tank destroyer lieutenant acknowledged the instructions. His crews began checking ammunition loads and gun mechanisms. At 10 o'clock, Murphy received a call on the field telephone from battalion. A major offensive was developing across the entire sector. Multiple German units were counterattacking, trying to push American forces back and stabilize the Colmar pocket defensive line. Company B should expect heavy contact within the next few hours. Hold position. Reinforcements were not available. Every reserve unit was committed elsewhere. Murphy gathered his 18 remaining men. He laid out the situation without embellishment. The Germans were coming. The company would hold its position. Anyone who could not continue fighting should move to the rear now. No questions asked, no judgment rendered. No one moved. These were the survivors, the ones who had lasted through 12 days of continuous combat. They had stopped expecting to survive. They would fight, because that was what remained. The German barrage began at 13:45. Artillery rounds impacted across Company B's position in a systematic pattern that indicated careful preparation. The Wehrmacht gunners were walking their fire through the American lines, searching for concentrations of troops and equipment. Murphy and his men pressed themselves into foxholes, covering their heads as shrapnel whined overhead. The bombardment lasted 11 minutes. When it lifted, Murphy knew what would follow. The German infantry emerged from the tree line at 13:58. Murphy counted over 200 soldiers advancing in extended formation, moving by squads with practiced coordination. Behind them, 6 tanks rolled into view. Mk4 Panzers, 25-ton vehicles mounting 75mm main guns and multiple machine guns. The armor spread out to provide covering fire for the infantry advance. Murphy shouted for his men to open fire. M1 rifles cracked across the position. The company's 2 remaining bars sent bursts toward the advancing Germans. The range was 300 yards in closing. Too far for accurate rifle fire, but volume mattered now, forcing the enemy to take cover, disrupting their formation, buying seconds that might matter later. The M10 tank destroyers opened fire at 275 yards. The first 3-inch round hit a Panzer in the glassy plate and ricocheted skyward. The German tank kept coming. The second M10 fired, striking another Panzer in the tracks. The vehicle slewed sideways, immobilized but still capable of firing its weapons. The crew traversed their turret toward the American position and sent a 75mm shell screaming toward Company B's lines. The German infantry was running now, covering ground in short rushes while their tanks provided suppressing fire. Machine gun rounds tore through the air above Murphy's foxhole. He aimed his carbine at a Wehrmacht soldier 150 yards distant and squeezed the trigger. The German went down. Murphy shifted to another target. Fired again. The mechanics of combat took over, the repetitive cycle of aim, fire, reload that training had drilled into muscle memory. At 14:04, a Panzer round hit the lead M10 directly in the turret. The vehicle exploded in a fireball of ammunition and fuel. The crew had no chance. Murphy watched the tank destroyer burn, knowing that half his anti-armor capability had just been eliminated. The second M10 continued firing, its crew working frantically to engage multiple targets. Another Panzer took a hit to the engine compartment and began smoking, but the remaining German armor pressed forward. The Wehrmacht infantry reached 100 yards from Company B's position. Murphy could see individual faces now, young men in field gray uniforms who looked as tired and cold as his own soldiers. He kept firing. Around him, his men maintained their rate of fire, pouring rounds into German formation. Bodies fell in the snow-covered field. The advance slowed but did not stop. At 14:10, the second M10 took a direct hit from a Panzer. The round penetrated the thin armor and detonated inside the crew compartment. The tank destroyer lurched to a stop, flames erupting from the engine. The vehicle was finished, but the fire had not yet reached the fuel tanks. The .50 caliber machine gun on the turret remained intact, loaded with a full ammunition belt. Murphy made his decision in the space between heartbeats. His position was being overrun. The German infantry was 75 yards away and advancing. His 18 men could not hold against 200 attackers supported by tanks. Retreat was a logical choice. Pull back to the tree line behind the company position, establish a new defensive line, buy time for battalion to organize reinforcements. Murphy rejected logic. He had spent 12 days fighting for these frozen fields. Men had died to take this ground. Retreating meant their deaths had purchased nothing. He would not give the Germans a single yard they had not paid for in blood. He grabbed a field telephone and connected with battalion. His voice was calm, matter-of-fact. Company B was being overrun by armor and infantry. He was going to man the .50 caliber on the burning tank destroyer and direct artillery fire onto his own position. He needed fire support immediately. The battalion fire directions center acknowledged. Rounds would be incoming in 3 minutes. Murphy handed the telephone to his platoon sergeant. Keep the line open. Adjust artillery as needed. Get the men back to the tree line if the position became untenable. The sergeant started to protest. Murphy was already moving, running in a crouch toward the burning M10 50 yards away. Murphy reached the M10 at 14:13. Flames were spreading from the engine compartment. Heat radiated from the vehicle's hull. The smell of burning fuel and rubber filled his nostrils. He climbed onto the rear deck, then pulled himself up to the turret. The .50 caliber machine gun was mounted on a pintle at the rear of the fighting compartment. Murphy swung the weapon toward the advancing German infantry and checked the ammunition belt. Full load, approximately 400 rounds. The German soldiers saw him, a lone American standing fully exposed on top of a burning vehicle. Machine gun fire converged on his position. Rounds sparked off the turret armor. Murphy ignored them. He gripped the .50 caliber spade handles, pressed the butterfly trigger, and sent a stream of tracers into the nearest squad of Wehrmacht infantry. The heavy machine gun hammered against his shoulders. The weapon fired at 450 rounds per minute, each .50 caliber round capable of punching through light armor and devastating human targets. Murphy walked his fire across the German formation, watching men fall as the heavy bullets found them. He shifted to another group of infantry, attempting to flank his position. Fired again. Bodies tumbled into the snow. The first American artillery rounds impacted at 1416. 105 millimeters high explosive shells from the division artillery battalions, falling in a pattern that Murphy had called directly onto Company B's position. The explosions erupted among the German infantry, throwing bodies into the air and forcing survivors to seek cover. Murphy was standing inside his own artillery barrage, close enough to feel concussion from each detonation. He kept firing the .50 caliber. A Panzer turned its turret toward his position. Murphy saw the 75 millimeters gun barrel traverse, aligning on the burning M10. He had perhaps 3 seconds before the tank fired. He shifted his aim to the Panzer and sent a long burst of .50 caliber fire at the vision ports. The rounds would not penetrate the armor, but they might force the crew to button up, degrading their ability to aim accurately. The Panzer fired. The round passed 3 feet over Murphy's head and detonated in the field behind him. The German gunner had rushed his shot, unnerved by the tracers hammering against his tank's hull. Murphy returned to firing at infantry targets. German soldiers were attempting to close with the M10, try to reach the vehicle and kill the American who was destroying their attack. Murphy cut them down at ranges under 30 yards, the .50 caliber tearing through flesh and bone with mechanical efficiency. The battle compressed into a series of immediate problems, requiring immediate solutions. German infantry squad attempting to flank left, traverse gun, fire, check ammunition, adjust fire. Wehrmacht soldiers running toward the tank destroyer, depress gun barrel, fire, watch them fall, artillery adjusting, rounds falling closer, shrapnel pinging off turret armor, ignore it, new targets, more infantry, always more infantry. Murphy's world narrowed to the iron sights of the .50 caliber and the field of fire in front of him. The flames from the M10's engine were intensifying. He could feel heat through his boots where he stood on the turret. The vehicle could explode at any moment. The fuel tanks were full when the tank destroyer had been hit. High-octane gasoline was pooling somewhere beneath him, vapors mixing with oxygen, waiting for a spark to create an inferno that would consume everything within 50 feet. He fired the .50 caliber until the barrel glowed red, fired until his shoulders ached from the recoil, fired until the ammunition belt ran dry. Then he reloaded, pulling a fresh bell from the ammunition box and feeding it into the weapon's receiver. The process took 20 seconds. German infantry advanced during those 20 seconds, closing to within 40 yards. Murphy finished reloading and sent them diving for cover with a sustained burst that traversed their entire line. The field telephone line, the battalion remained open. Murphy shouted fire corrections to his platoon sergeant, adjusting artillery onto concentrations of German troops. The shells fell in a tight pattern, walking across the battlefield in response to Murphy's directions. The Wehrmacht attack began to falter, soldiers seeking cover from the artillery rather than pressing forward into the American position. At 14:35, Murphy's right leg went numb. He looked down and saw blood spreading across his trousers. Shrapnel from a near miss had opened a gash across his calf. He had not felt the impact. Adrenaline and focus had pushed the pain into some distant corner of his consciousness where it could be ignored. He shifted his weight to his left leg and continued firing. The German tanks were pulling back, reversing away from the American position. Their infantry support had been shattered by the combination of artillery and sustained .50 caliber fire. Without infantry protection, the Panzers were vulnerable to American tank destroyers and bazookas. The tank commanders had made their calculation. The attack was failing. Continuing forward meant losing their vehicles for no tactical gain. German infantry began withdrawing at 1442, not a rout, but a controlled tactical retreat. Squads provided covering fire while other elements fell back toward the tree line. Murphy continued engaging targets as they presented themselves, firing at anyone visible in the open ground. The Wehrmacht soldiers had learned respect for the lone American on the burning tank destroyer. They gave his position a wide berth, unwilling to come within range of that devastating machine gun. The last German soldiers disappeared into the tree line at 1448. The attack had lasted 50 minutes. Murphy had been standing on the burning M10 for 35 of those minutes. He released a .50 caliber's trigger and looked at the battlefield. Bodies lay scattered across 200 yards of frozen ground. German and American artillery had torn the earth into a moonscape of craters. Smoke drifted across the scene, mixing with the cold air to create a fog that obscured details. Murphy climbed down from the tank destroyer. His right leg nearly buckled when he put weight on it. He limped back to Company B's position, where his platoon sergeant and the surviving men were emerging from their foxholes. No one spoke. There was nothing to say that would capture what had just occurred. The medics reached Murphy at 1505. They examined his leg wound, cleaning shrapnel fragments from the torn muscle tissue and applying a field dressing. The injury required evacuation to an aid station for proper treatment. Murphy refused. Company B had 18 men remaining. He was the only officer. He would stay with his unit. Battalion sent forward a casualty report request at 1520. Murphy conducted a count of German dead visible from American positions. Approximately 50 bodies could be confirmed. The actual number was likely higher, with wounded evacuated during the German withdrawal and additional casualties concealed by terrain. American losses during the attack were 2 killed for wounded. The mathematics favored the defender, but the numbers could not capture the margin by which Company B had avoided annihilation. The Wehrmacht launched a second attack at 1630. Smaller this time, a single company of infantry supported by 2 tanks. Murphy directed artillery onto the formation before it could close within rifle range. The Germans withdrew after losing a dozen men to the initial bombardment. They did not attempt a third attack that day. Company B was relieved at 2100 hours. Fresh troops from the regimental reserve moved forward to occupy the position. Murphy's men assembled in the darkness, forming a column for the march to the rear. They moved through Holtzwir's ruins, past burned-out buildings and shattered vehicles, back to a collection area where hot food and rest awaited. Murphy reported to battalion headquarters at 2230. The battalion commander wanted a personal debrief on the day's action. Murphy provided a factual account describing the German attack, his decision to man the .50 caliber on the burning tank destroyer, and the artillery fire that had broken the enemy formation. The battalion commander listened without interruption. When Murphy finished, the commander made notes in his journal and told Murphy to get some sleep. The official after-action report was filed on January 27th. The document credited Murphy with killing or wounding approximately 50 German soldiers and stopping a battalion-strength attack with single machine gun. The report recommended Murphy for the Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration the United States could award. The paperwork began its journey through division, corps, and Army headquarters, accumulating endorsements from officers who had not been present but who understood what the dry military language actually described. Audie Murphy received the Medal of Honor on June 2nd, 1945, at a ceremony in occupied Germany. The war in Europe had ended 3 weeks earlier. Murphy stood at attention while a general read the citation and placed the medal around his neck. The other soldiers in his unit watched. Most had been replacements who had joined the 3rd Division after Holtzwihr. They knew Murphy by reputation. Stories had spread to the regiment about the lieutenant who had held off a German company while standing on a burning tank. The Medal of Honor was the capstone of an extraordinary collection of decorations. By the end of the war, Murphy had received every combat award the United States Army could bestow: the Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star with Oak Leaf Cluster, the Legion of Merit, the Bronze Star with V device and Oak Leaf Cluster, 3 Purple Hearts, The Medal of Honor brought his total to 28 decorations from the United States, plus 5 from France and 1 from Belgium. He was 20 years old, the most decorated American soldier of World War II, a sharecropper son from Texas who had lied about his age to enlist and who had never expected to survive the war. Murphy had no particular ambitions for what came next. The Army was the only life he knew. Combat was the only skill he had developed. Peace seemed like a foreign country for which he had no map. Murphy shipped home to the United States in July 1945. The Army assigned him to public relations duties, sending him on war bond tours and ceremonial appearances. He hated it. The speeches, the press conferences, the constant attention from people who wanted to shake hands with a hero. Murphy did not feel like a hero. He felt like a survivor who had gotten lucky while better men had died. The nightmares began in late 1945. Murphy would wake screaming, reliving moments from combat that he could not consciously remember during daylight hours. The faces of German soldiers he had killed, the sounds of wounded men calling for help in languages he did not understand, the smell of burning flesh from the tank destroyer at Holtzwihr. Sleep became something to avoid, a passage into darkness where memory ambushed him without warning. Hollywood noticed Murphy in 1948. His photograph had appeared on the cover of Life magazine in 1945, a baby-faced lieutenant wearing the Medal of Honor and looking directly at the camera with eyes that had seen too much. The image caught the attention of actor James Cagney, who invited Murphy to California and helped him launch an acting career. Murphy appeared in 44 films between 1948 and 1969. War movies mostly, playing soldiers in stories that bore little resemblance to actual combat. The role that defined his career was playing himself into Hell and Back, a 1955 film adaptation of his autobiography. Murphy portrayed his own combat experiences, including the stand at Holtzwihr, in scenes that sanitized the reality of what had occurred. The public saw a war hero who had transitioned successfully to civilian life. Behind that image was a man struggling with what would later be diagnosed as post-traumatic stress disorder. Murphy suffered from depression, insomnia, and episodes of violence that he could barely control. He slept with a loaded pistol under his pillow. He startled at loud noises. Crowds made him anxious. The symptoms persisted for the rest of his life, a price extracted by combat that no medal could acknowledge. Murphy advocated publicly for better treatment of veterans suffering from psychological trauma. He spoke openly about his own struggles, challenging the stigma that prevented many veterans from seeking help. His willingness to discuss his PTSD was remarkable for the era, a time when such admissions were considered weakness. Murphy did not care about the judgment. He had learned during the war that survival mattered more than reputation. Audie Murphy died on May 28, 1971, when a private plane crashed in poor weather near Roanoke, Virginia. He was 45 years old. The pilot had continued flying into deteriorating conditions, eventually losing control in clouds and impacting a mountainside. Murphy and 5 other passengers were killed instantly. The man who had survived 3 years of combat died in a civilian aircraft accident, the kind of random tragedy that respects neither courage nor reputation. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery on June 7, 1971. The funeral procession stretched for miles. Veterans from World War II, Korea, and Vietnam came to pay respects. President Nixon sent a representative. Murphy's grave site became one of the most visited locations in Arlington, second only to President Kennedy's eternal flame. Even decades after his death, thousands of visitors stop at his headstone each year, leaving coins and flags and notes thanking him for his service. The headstone itself is standard military issue. Name, rank, dates of birth and death, military decorations represented by engraved symbols. Nothing on the stone indicates that the man buried there was the most decorated soldier in American military history. Murphy had specified in his will that he wanted no special treatment, no exceptions to standard military burial protocol. In death as in life, he wanted to be counted among the ordinary soldiers who had done their duty. The 3rd Infantry Division still exists, carrying forward a legacy of units like Company B. New generations of soldiers learn about Audie Murphy during their training, studying his actions at Holtzwihr as an example of leadership under extreme conditions. The lessons focus on tactical decision-making, fire direction, and the use of available weapon systems. The instructors mention Murphy's Medal of Honor. They rarely mention the nightmares that followed. The burning M10 tank destroyer exists only in photographs and official reports. The vehicle was scrapped after the war, reduced to raw materials that were repurposed for peacetime industry. No physical remnant remains of the machine on which Murphy made a stand. The ground where he fought is returned to agricultural use. Fields planted with crops that grow in soil once stained with blood from multiple nations. Holtzwihr is a quiet French village today. Tourism brochures mention its location along the route to Vins-Dalsis. Some older buildings still bear marks from the 1945 fighting, bullet scars and stone walls that residents have chosen not to repair. A small memorial plaque commemorates the American soldiers who died liberating the village. Murphy's name is listed among others, equal in death to men who never received medals for their sacrifice. The tactical innovation Murphy demonstrated at Holtzwihr was not revolutionary. Using a .50 caliber machine gun to defend a position was standard infantry doctrine. Calling artillery fire onto one's own position was a recognized technique for breaking enemy attacks. What made Murphy's action extraordinary was not the technique, but the execution, the willingness to stand exposed on a burning vehicle while directing fire with precision that destroyed an enemy formation. Modern military analysis of the Holtzwihr action focuses on Murphy's fire direction. He adjusted artillery throughout the engagement, walking rounds across German positions with accuracy that suggested exceptional skill at estimating range and timing. The combination of .50 caliber direct fire and 105 millimeters indirect fire created a defensive barrier that German forces could not penetrate. Murphy had transformed a desperate situation into a tactical victory through aggressive use of available firepower. The psychological dimension receives less attention in military studies. Standing on a vehicle that could explode at any moment required a level of risk acceptance that exceeded normal combat courage. Murphy had made a conscious decision that death was acceptable if it bought time for his men to survive. That calculation, repeated across thousands of small unit actions throughout history, represents the essence of military leadership that no training manual can adequately describe. The men who served with Murphy at Holtzwihr are gone now. The last survivors of Company B died in the early 2000s, taking their memories of that frozen January day into whatever comes after. Their accounts, preserved in interviews and memoirs, corroborate the official records. Murphy had done what the citations claimed, standing alone against an enemy company while fire and steel tried to kill him. The question that persists is why. Why did a 20-year-old lieutenant choose to die on a burning tank destroyer rather than retreat to safety? The simple answer is duty, the obligation to protect his men and hold assigned ground. The deeper answer involves factors that Murphy himself could never fully articulate. Pride, stubbornness, anger at an enemy who had killed his friends, and perhaps a fatalistic acceptance that death would find him eventually regardless of his actions. Murphy rarely spoke about Holtzwihr in the decades after the war. When pressed by interviewers, he deflected questions with brief answers that revealed nothing of his emotional state during the action. He had done what needed doing. Other men had performed similar actions without receiving medals. The attention made him uncomfortable. He preferred to talk about the soldiers who had not come home, names that the public had forgotten, but that Murphy carried with him always. The legacy of Audie Murphy exists in multiple forms. The official legacy, preserved in military records and Medal of Honor citations. The Hollywood legacy, dozens of films that created a public image of heroism sanitized for entertainment. The personal legacy, memories held by family members who knew him as a troubled man struggling with demons that combat had created. Each version is true. Each version is incomplete. What remains most powerfully is the image of a small man standing on a burning vehicle, firing a machine gun at an advancing enemy, while artillery falls around him. That image transcends the specific details of time and place, becoming a symbol of individual courage confronting overwhelming odds. The fact that Murphy survived makes the story inspirational. The fact that he suffered afterward makes the story human. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor, hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We rescue forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about sharecroppers who became heroes. Real people, real courage, real costs. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from the United States, France, Germany, anywhere across this world? Our community stretches across the entire globe. You're not just a viewer. You're a part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure Audie Murphy does not disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.